The European Arrest Warrant was designed to make sure serious criminals abroad could be brought back to justice. But is it being used overzealously?
Between 2005 and 2009, more than 54,000 extradition requests were made across Europe, and crimes have included pig rustling and stolen bicycles. So is it time to make some serious changes, or should it be scrapped altogether?
To discuss the issue here in the European News studio, we've been joined by the Lib Dem MEP who steered the idea for the arrest warrant through the European Parliament, Graham Watson.
And by UK Independence Party MEP William Dartmouth. Graham Watson, I turn to you first. There are a number of concerns here about the arrest warrant, but taking first the issue of minor offences, are countries simply overusing it?
Well, we had a debate in Parliament in Strasbourg recently, precisely because one country in particular, Poland, has been issuing European arrest warrants for crimes which, frankly, are not covered in the legislation. The legislation says very clearly that these should only be used for serious crimes, crimes that carry a specific term in prison if the person is convicted. And there is evidence that it has been used frivolously, and I'm very pleased that other countries have come together with the European Commission and said, no, this cannot go on.
William Dartmouth, since we have the European arrest warrant, is it wrong for countries to use it for minor offences?
Well, the primary purpose of the law is to protect people from random arrest and arbitrary imprisonment. The primary purpose of the law is not, it's only a secondary purpose to actually punish people. Now, what the European arrest warrant has done, and I don't want to personalise this, but I think that Sir Graham Watson should be really ashamed of what he's done, and so should the party and so should the Liberal Democrats, which have been vociferous supporters of this, is that it's thrown out the long-established protections of British law, specifically habeas corpus, no imprisonment without trial. Anybody can be carted off to a foreign country, to a former Eastern Bloc country, and there they are subjected to a legal system or series of legal systems which simply lock people up for long periods of years with no trial even being considered. It was sold as being a way of curing terror in the backwash of 9/11 as being something that would help apprehend terrorists. And as you rightly said, actually, the vast majority of European arrest warrants are used for comparatively minor offences, and in many cases for offences which would not even be offences in the state from which the person is being carted off.
On the issue of those minor offences, which is the one that we wanted to tackle first, Graham Watson, why is that a problem? What problem does that create to use the European arrest warrant for minor offences?
Well, let me say, it is certainly not true, as Lord Dartmouth has just said, that the vast majority of warrants issued are for minor offences. Absolutely not true. The vast majority of warrants issued are for serious offences, and they have allowed us to overcome serious crimes. It's the European arrest warrant that brought back the London bomber Hussein Osman from Rome to face trial for his crimes. It's the European arrest warrant that brought back the rapist Trevor Masters to face charges on his litany of serious crimes. There have been cases where it has been used frivolously. These have been taken up, and as a result we had a parliamentary debate last week, and things are being done, because it's wrong of Poland or any other country to try to use it in that way.
You mentioned Poland. I understand they issued nearly 5,000 warrants in 2009 compared to about 200 by the UK. Is this a burden on police forces in the UK? William Dartmouth is saying that's where his concerns are.
Well, it certainly does put a burden on the system, but of course what the system allows, and Lord Dartmouth has perhaps not made this very clear, is it allows a judge to refuse to extradite somebody if the rules are not followed. And there is no reason, in fact, British judges do refuse very frequently to extradite people in response to arrest warrants if they believe that the arrest warrant has been issued frivolously, or if they believe there is a danger that the person would not have their rights respected in the country to which they're being extradited.
The point that Graham Watson has made is always trotted out. It was trotted out by Graham Watson's colleague Baroness Ludford in the debate, saying that judges and British judges can resist extradition on the basis of human rights. There's very, very few. I haven't found a single example of that being the case. And there's a long report by Fair Trials International, which is an objective and long-established body, which actually makes the point that it's almost impossible to actually prove this. And in addition, British judges take the view that if a country is a member of the European Union, indeed, more than that, if a country has been a signatory of the European Convention of Human Rights, that objection is not valid to somebody being extradited from the UK. So that argument simply doesn't wash.
Graham Watson, do you accept that there's a need for more safeguards for the UK government maybe to play a role in the way they interpret European things from here into UK law?
I think there is a need, and indeed I remember being critical at the time when the measure was implemented into United Kingdom law that the Labour government chose to do it in such a way that made it more difficult for judges to refuse extradition. They still can, and I can mention 30 cases last year in which they did. But if they had gone for the German option, they would have built more civil liberties safeguards into it. And I'm very pleased to say that one of the first acts of the new coalition government was to say we will revise the way in which the European Arrest Warrant has been implemented into European law. But the real point of it is this: crime is international. Somebody can commit a crime and escape over a border before the policeman has got his boots on. This is the single most effective tool that we have to get our police forces and our judicial authorities working together to deal with serious crime, so that if somebody's committed a crime and escaped somewhere else, they can be brought back to face trial.
Graham Watson, they're saying that the coalition is going to bring in more safeguards. What do you make of that?
Well, I wrote to the government minister concerned about 9 months ago, asking for an immediate suspension of the European Arrest Warrant. And the then government minister said, that is impossible, but we're having a review. But I mean, meantime, these miscarriages of justice are still taking place, and they're still ruining people's lives. The point I would make, and this is a very, very important point, is this. It is perfectly possible for governments and police forces to cooperate without suspending completely and trashing the hard-won liberties of British law which have been established over generations. Britain has been a member of Interpol since 1923. We had, at least before the European Arrest Warrant, there was a series of fast-track extradition treaties being negotiated with other countries, specifically Spain in 2003. Now, I don't really normally have much of a brief for the Labour government, but I have to, nor for Jack Straw, but that was what Jack Straw was doing. Now, i.e. negotiating fast-track extradition. And the fact of the matter is, yes, governments can cooperate against criminals, and they do. Yes, police forces can cooperate together across international boundaries, and they do. And all this can be accomplished without making 60 million, nearly 60 million British residents liable to be carted off to jail in foreign countries, there to languish for periods of up to 4 years, which actually happened to two of my constituents.
Graham Watson.
There is one case I'm aware of, and I think it is a serious case of abuse of civil liberties in which a European arrest warrant was involved. It's the only case that I'm aware of. There are many, many cases where it has been used to do what it needs to do.
But
and
there
I
are
think
concerns,
need to be addressed. I think there are concerns to be addressed, and indeed when the measure went through, we insisted with the European Commission that they brought forward a directive on the rights of suspects in criminal legal proceedings. That directive was brought forward. Sadly, the 27 member states couldn't find agreement, so it sat in the European Council's in-tray for 7 or 8 years. It is now gradually, in a rather piecemeal fashion, being put into effect because precisely there have been 1 or 2 cases which have given cause for concern. But the reality is criminals work across borders, and if the law cannot work across borders, then we're not going to get on top of crime.
So where do we go from now, in effect? You know, the European arrest warrant does exist. You've called for it to be scrapped. Is that the only option? Can we not reform
There
it?
should be an immediate suspension of the European arrest warrant, and police and governments should cooperate in order to suppress international crime. And this can be done perfectly well, has been done, going back to the days of Dr. Crippen, has been done without this draconian piece of legislation, which Sir Graham Watson has already said, has already pointed out the flaws in it. It was peculiarly all ill thought out. And I must make this point. Many bits of ill thought out legislation come into law. It's one of the things that politicians do. They pass ill thought out bits of legislation. The unusual characteristic that this piece of legislation has is that it is ruining people's lives, and people are suffering cruel and unusual punishment, and that is why it is unreformed and unreformable and should go.
If that were the case, I'm sure the Minister would have agreed with Lord Dartmouth and would have suspended it. And I know that the reason why the Minister didn't is that it is a very, very effective way of combating international crime.
You're not going to agree, but we must leave it there. Thanks ever so much, both of you, for
Thank you very much.
joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.